Hey Star Trek fans, welcome to another episode of Dan's Disco Deep Dives, taking a look at the Easter eggs, canon connections, and theories about Season 2, Episode 7, Light and Shadows. Story by Ted Sullivan and Vaughn Wilmot, teleplay by Ted Sullivan. Light and Shadows was directed by Marta Cunningham, who happens to be the wife of James Frain, the actor who plays Sarek. Early in the episode, we learn that Spock's shuttle was found in the Mutara Sector. This sector was featured in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. The area of space is home to the Mutara Nebula, in which the Enterprise under Kirk fought the USS Reliant, which had been commandeered by Khan Noonien Singh. It would later be home to the Genesis planet, created at the end of Star Trek II, and the site of Spock's resurrection in Star Trek III. Spock is being hidden by his mother in a Vulcan shrine, which houses something called Kotter Stones, which block telepathic signals, therefore stymieing Sarek's attempts to locate Spock. While we have never heard of Kotter Stones before, it's possible that they are related to Katric arcs, receptacles that hold the Katras, or living spirits, of deceased Vulcans. Also within the Vulcan shrine, there appears to be a replica of the Kirshara, Surak's original writings discovered in Vulcan's Forge in the three-part Vulcan Reformation arc episodes of Star Trek Enterprise's 4th season. In the course of the episode, we learn that Spock inherited a sort of learning difficulty from his human side that caused issues in his education during his early years. We know from the animated series episode Yesteryear, as well as Star Trek 2009, that Spock was picked on by his fellow classmates as a child. The fact that he had acquired a type of learning disability from his mother's side of the family could have provided more ammunition for the bullying he experienced. Spock's mother, Amanda, is noted as being a teacher. It makes sense that she would take a vested interest in helping Spock through his learning difficulties, and we learn that she read Alice in Wonderland to Spock even before Michael Burnham came into their house in order to teach Spock how to cope with a world that doesn't seem to make sense. Alice in Wonderland has come up in Discovery before, but I wanted to note here that it wasn't just in Discovery that we learned that Amanda had an affinity for Lewis Carroll and the Adventures in Wonderland.
The Queen of Hearts and her cards are characters from Alice Through the Looking Glass, Captain.
I read the book as a child, Mr. Spock, but I wasn't aware you indulged in the literature of fantasy.
Light reading is considered relaxing, Captain. My mother was particularly fond of Lewis Carroll's work.
During Pike and Tyler's mission to the Time Rift, we get a few close-up shots of the shuttlecraft's controls. If you look very closely, there are a few Easter eggs. Note the abbreviations DS9, TNG, VOI, and ENT, referring to each of the live-action spin-offs of Star Trek. Also during this shuttle mission, if you listen carefully as the shuttle strains against the pull of the rift, you might notice a familiar sound effect, the warp engine strain sound from Star Trek the original series.
We need a fixed point to target if we're going to navigate by dead.
You telling me how to fly now?
Captain, I'm not the enemy here.
It's subtle, but it's definitely there. Pike borrows a maneuver from the original series as well. As the shuttle is pulled into the rift, Pike releases and ignites the shuttle's drive plasma to serve as an emergency beacon for Discovery to find them. Spock performed a similar action out of desperation at the end of the original series episode The Galileo 7. Luckily, in both instances, the maneuver allowed the surviving shuttle crews to be rescued. During Burnham and Spock's escape from the Section 31 ship, we get a close look at Georgiou's phaser as she half-heartedly tries to stop their escape. It's very reminiscent of a later style of phaser that we would see in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. Like I said in a previous video, Section 31 gets all the best toys. At the end of the episode, Burnham figures out that Spock's mysterious numbers are actually backwards, and the computer identifies them as the coordinates of the planet Talos 4. Burnham orders the shuttle to set course to Talos 4 and engage at maximum warp. It looks like next week we'll be visiting the Forbidden Planet. Let's talk a little bit about Talos 4. This planet first appeared in the original pilot episode for Star Trek, The Cage. The Enterprise, under the command of Captain Christopher Pike, answers a distress call from an Earth ship that crashed there, the SS Columbia. Upon beaming down, they find a survivors' encampment and make preparations to transport the survivors to the Enterprise. Among these survivors is a young woman named Vina, who is personally alluring to Captain Pike. Luring him into an ambush by the native species, the Talosians, Vina becomes a part of a series of illusions and fantasies designed to make Pike want to remain with her on Talos 4. In actuality, Pike is a prisoner of the Talosians, who are hoping to make Pike and Vina the forebears of a slave race of humans to help them rebuild their devastated world. However, they eventually come to the conclusion that humans are too violent and are particularly unsuited to captivity, and let them go. Remaining behind is Vina, who is badly disfigured following the crash on Talos 4. The Talosians return to her the illusion of a perfectly functioning body, along with an illusion of Captain Pike to keep her company. Flash forward 13 years, and the Enterprise once again returns to Talos 4, this time with the disabled Captain Christopher Pike in the two-part TOS episode The Menagerie. Spock, committing mutiny, commandeers the Enterprise to transport Pike there. In the intervening years, Starfleet has instituted General Order 7, a directive that no one is to go to Talos 4. It is the only death penalty on the Federation's books. I have always enjoyed The Cage, and especially The Menagerie, with its creative reuse of the footage that had been shot for the unsold first pilot. One problem I did have with that episode, however, is General Order 7. Based on what happened in The Cage, it didn't seem to me to be worth the imposition of the death penalty for what had happened on Talos 4. For example, the shenanigans that one could wreak with the Time Planet seen in City on the Edge of Forever would seem to almost be more dangerous than visiting Talos 4. Surely the events that we saw in The Cage could not warrant the death penalty for anybody who traveled to that planet. In fact, when discussing General Order 7 with Captain Kirk, Commodore Mendez even says,
"Only Fleet Command knows why. Not even this file explains that."
So why exactly does this order exist? When Burnham orders the shuttle to set course for Talos 4, there's no mention of any kind of penalty for visiting the planet, nor does the computer protest in any way. Is it possible that General Order 7 doesn't exist yet at the time of Star Trek Discovery? The Cage happened about 3 years before Light and Shadows, and the Menagerie will happen another 10 years past that, approximately. So if The Cage is Act 1 of the story and the Menagerie is Act 3, we are smack dab in the middle in Act 2. Might the reason for that rule's existence be revealed in the next episode, or perhaps later in Discovery's second season? I don't know about you, but I'm very excited at the prospect, and hopefully at least some of these questions will be answered in this week's episode. Not the least of which are, will Talos 4 still feature those really cool singing plants from The Cage, and do the backs of the Talosian heads still look like butts? As usual, before I get to my theory that I've crafted for this week's episode, I want to take a look at some of the comments that you all left on last week's deep dive video. Zamboni Josiah has a great theory, and it's quite long. I'm going to read part of it, though. Alex Kurtzman said that one of his intentions with bringing Captain Pike aboard this season was, quote, to recontextualize Captain Pike's eventual fate so that it's a triumph instead of a tragedy. What institutions on current Earth are often pivotal in the preservation, breeding, and repopulation of endangered species? Zoos. What advanced species that once had more advanced technology operates and maintains a zoo of rare creatures from around the galaxy? The Talosians. We already know that this season will eventually take the story to Talos 4. What if the Talosians are in fact the once and future preservers? What if the Red Angel is Vina? It's already known that the Talosians once had a greater technological capability than they exhibited in The Cage, and that their technological capabilities atrophied as their mental powers increased. What if Pike and Vina wind up resurrecting that technology? Gerard Rubin states, I still think that the Red Angel has something to do with Zora and the reason why the Discovery would eventually be abandoned. Could the Red Angel be Kraft? He's from the 33rd century, and the Red Angel looks similar to the tattoo of the Cyclops owl that Zora spotted on Kraft's back, a creature native to his homeworld of Alcor 4. If it is Kraft, could he be trying to help Zora? For my theory this week, I'm going to lean heavily into the Arium is the Red Angel hypothesis. In this most recent episode, Discovery launched a probe into a temporal anomaly where it went forward in time 500 years, or perhaps simply existed for 500 years before being sent back to Discovery's present with an upgrade. My theory is this. In the 500 years it existed, the onboard computer program evolved, in much the same way that Zora did aboard the Discovery as seen in the Short Trek's episode Calypso. It somehow created more of itself, evolving into some sort of civilization. then came back in time to meet its creator, the crew of the Discovery. This is why it was trying to download the Discovery's database from the shuttle. Shortly before it was destroyed, it uploaded its consciousness into Commander Arium. At some point, she will take up the mantle of the Red Angel and travel through time, creating incursions that will account for all of the effects we've seen so far in Discovery's second season. In this way, Discovery's crew will have created the Red Angel themselves via their own probe of the temporal anomaly in a sort of predestination paradox. But that's just my theory. So what do you all think? Is it crazy or just crazy enough to be true? Let me know in the comments below. I have a lot of fun doing these theory videos each week, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join me in my obsession about talking about Star Trek. Thanks especially to the Patreon supporters, you all rock. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share with anybody you think might appreciate these videos. Thanks again so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next video, but until then, trust the math. And most importantly, trust yourselves.